Hi everyone, lovely to see so many people here today. It's awesome. I was diagnosed autistic when I was 42, and I was lucky to get a job at Autistic Minds, and I've gone from there really. I'm the voice you'd hear on the phone. Whenever you rang, it'd be me answering. It's not me answering anymore, we've got a triage system, but I offer support and advice to adult autistics, parents, anybody, that rings, and I try my best to find a solution. I've got the absolute pleasure, though, to introduce Leanne Upton. Me, the mental health system, and misdiagnosis. I hear this a lot on the phone line. So what I need to do now is just welcome her on the stage. Come on, Leanne.
Hi, everyone. This is a bit out of my normal comfort zone, but I hope in doing it, it will help my confidence and possibly help someone else. I'm here to speak about my story, misdiagnosis, and the UK's mental health system. I'm no professional speaker, just a young woman who was let down, who now is on a mission to make a positive difference for my fellow late diagnosed gang. So please do excuse me if I stumble on my words or as I flip through my pages of notes to try and keep myself on track. I also wanted to take this opportunity to disclose some content included in my speech that may be upsetting for some individuals. Today I will be talking briefly about sexual abuse and the heartbreaking statistics amongst autistic women. Other content I will be mentioning includes the mental health system, psychiatric wards, and sadly suicide. However, please do not let this put you off my speech. I will be including many positive comments and experiences too. So I first came into contact with mental health services at the age of 15. I had been referred after experiencing multiple panic attacks and anxiety that was affecting my day-to-day functioning in school and at home. I quickly then became low in mood and sadly soon made my first suicide attempt, all in the matter of weeks. In all honesty, I don't really remember in detail what had led to the build-up to that. On reflection now, I can only imagine at the time I was overwhelmed with anxiety and that I felt like it was my new forever, and that only way to fix this despair I felt was to quite simply end my life. I say this now and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart because I know right now there are other teenage girls out there stuck in a broken mental health system whose black and white thinking has led them to think their only option is suicide, when suicide isn't the answer. Sadly, figures show that as many as 11 to 66% of autistic adults had thought about suicide during their lifetime, and up to 35% of autistic adults had planned or attempted suicide. There are no treatments or prevention strategies designed for autistic people who are experiencing a mental health crisis and suicidal thoughts. A lack of professional knowledge and understanding around autism means many autistic people may not seem autistic enough for support or will receive strategies that are developed for people that are not autistic. The lack of inappropriate support can cause feelings of disempowerment, social isolation, and hopelessness amongst autistic individuals in crisis. Sadly, at just 16 years old, I lost my wonderful dad, Mark. He had cancer. It was a shock to us all, and sadly, from the time of his cancer diagnosis to my dad's death was just 3 short weeks. I'd always been such a daddy's girl, and I found it hard to adjust to life without him. The next 2 years involved lots of tears, suicide attempts, and hospital admissions. My mum, having just lost her husband of 20 years, was left to navigate her grief and care for her suicidal daughter with next to no help from mental health or social care services. We were both just absolutely broken. At 20 years old, I was still undiagnosed and didn't have a clue what was happening. And I was left in such a risky state by the healthcare professionals around me. Life became unbearable, and yet again, I'd convinced myself I didn't belong on this planet, and I travelled to London with the intention of ending my life. I was found by police, and they really did save my life. I fought with them as they tried to help me, and I'm so grateful now that they continue to help me, despite my desperate begging for them to let me die. I was then sectioned under the Mental Health Act and sent back to Devon and spent 3 months on my local acute mental health ward. At this point, I was repeatedly told by various mental health professionals that I was treatment resistant, not trying hard enough, and choosing not to engage. I'd worked my backside off and had continued to have my efforts dismissed by the very people I was meant to trust and want to work with. My mum had previously mentioned autism to me. We explored some of the symptoms I displayed that would fit with the possibility of me being autistic. The following week, during the ward round, I said to my mum that I wanted to mention this to my consultant at the time. My mum agreed with me and thought it was definitely an avenue worth exploring, so worth chatting to him about it. The more I learned, discussed and researched about autism, the more I felt I really could be autistic. It was definitely my light bulb moment. However, unfortunately, my experience of discussing this with my consultant at the time was quite a negative one, which left myself and my mum in tears. Now, on reflection, quite frankly, the way it was handled infuriates me. In discussion about the possibility of being autistic with my consultant, he asked if I'd ever been bullied at school, if I'd ever had any friends, and said because I've previously managed to hold down a job, these all factors contributed to him concluding that I couldn't possibly be autistic in his mind. Realistically, I know now his education around autism and the presentation of it in young women and girls was so outdated and biased because of my sex. The reality was I was a highly masked individual who had spent her whole life learning the rules of life. I was eventually discharged into supported living. Upon discharge from hospital, I was allocated a new community mental health nurse called Sarah. If she knew I was saying her name now, she would kill me. I barely said 2 words when I first met Sarah. I really felt I couldn't. The first few weeks after discharge, I was seen twice a week in the community by Sarah. After about 2 weeks of knowing me, during the end of one of her visits, she asked me, "Leanne, has anyone ever spoke to you about autism?" I explained my experience to her just a few weeks prior with my consultant in the hospital. She reassured me that she was in agreement, that she thought I was likely autistic, and gained my permission to speak with my mum and the rest of the community mental health team to progress this. Whilst I was waiting for my formal autism assessment, I was very fortunate that those involved in my care, friends and family, started communicating and working with me in a different way, an autistic-friendly way. My progress was soon evident, and eventually I was assessed and I received my diagnosis. I still stand by the statement that realising that I was autistic, and receiving my diagnosis definitely saved my life. In 2022, someone I'd been in hospital with previously that almost had a parallel story to mine sadly lost her life to suicide after being let down massively by the healthcare system in our country. I was sad that she felt this was the only way out, and of course I felt for her family she left behind grieving. This experience really twisted my stomach, and it was the first time during my mental health recovery that I stepped back and realised how close to death I was on so many occasions, how quite easily it could have been my mum burying me. On reflection, I really feel this was a turning point when I wanted to get involved in advocacy work so I could help make a difference for others still lost in the mental health system, like I was for all those years, and for people like my friend who had been sadly let down and had a very different outcome to my own. I know as a country we can be doing better to support autistic people's mental health and well-being by such simple and small changes. I think everyone thinks that it's got to be such expensive adjustments, and it's really not the case. And I know right now, as I speak to you all, there are many other autistic individuals that are stuck in the mental health system who haven't found their voice yet, and individuals that might not have even yet been picked up as neurodivergent in one way or another. I'm so grateful I've got through the last 10 years and managed to come out the other side, quite simply, alive. And now that I've found my voice, I intend to keep using it for as long as people are there listening. If stepping out of my comfort zone to do things like I am today can make a difference for one other individual, then it's been so worth it. My passion for advocacy work and public speaking stemmed from a fantastic opportunity last year. To be honest, talking about it now, I still can't believe it happened and why I agreed to it. But it was great fun. At the beginning of 2022, I saw online a TV production company were looking for autistic individuals to be involved in some research for an upcoming documentary they were creating. I loved being involved in the research side of the documentary and enjoyed helping myth bust some common misconceptions around autism, especially the presentation of autism in women and girls. Little did I know when I signed up at this point, I would then later agree to be filmed for the documentary and for it to go out on national TV on a prime TV channel for literally millions of people to see. Although I enjoyed the experience, it still makes me want to vomit the idea of how many people watched me chat. But it did happen, and I appeared on a BBC documentary called Christine McGuinness, Unmasking My Autism. The assistant producer was keen to have my mum involved too. He phoned me when I was out and my mum was at work. I did agree on my mum's behalf, sorry mum, so that we could take part in this crazy adventure together. Following on from the documentary, NHS England Digital released the fantastic statistics that following the broadcast of the documentary, they saw an 83% increase to their page called Signs of Autism in Adults, and a 64% rise to their How to Access an Autism Diagnosis page. Now, my goal from the start of getting involved in the documentary was to make a positive impact for at least one other person and continue to help educate the public and health professionals of the presentation of autism in women and girls. I am still 6 months on from the broadcast receiving the most heartbreaking yet heartwarming messages from others who share their experience of late diagnosis, misdiagnosis, and parts of the documentary they enjoyed or they related to. When I tell you I have kept each and every single message or comment Some people wouldn't believe me, but I wanted to document it, and yeah, it was just great. I will always be grateful to Christine and the whole team behind the documentary for their hard work and allowing me the opportunity to help make a change. The only trouble is, I've gone from the girl who wouldn't be able to string a sentence together to a confident young woman who doesn't shut up. Again, following on from the documentary, I started some involvement work with my local mental health trust. In just under a year, I've assisted with various interviews, helped deliver inductions, took part in large-scale review of restrictive practice, reviewed trust guidance for various things, and taken part in inspections of inpatient facilities. I never would have had the confidence to do this before taking part in a documentary. By being involved, I feel I'm continuing my goal of making a positive difference for other misdiagnosed or late diagnosed individuals. My mental health trust now has their own expert by experience team, and I've been really loving being part of such a positive change locally to me in Devon. Through the involvement groups, I've been able to strongly advocate for neurodivergent individuals using the services locally to me to ensure steps are being taken in the right direction to make sure mental health services are becoming more accessible. I've been able to be part of implementing small changes to have a positive impact, such as offering hospital passports to some settings at the point when people first come into contact with services, as well as being involved in staff training on autism and common comorbid mental health conditions. One part of being autistic that I never really see spoken about is the loneliness that can come with not being able to read social cues, always feeling out of the loop and like you're missing something and you're the one that's kept out of all of the inside jokes. I feel this is increased for those of us who have experienced a late diagnosis. Although it was such a relief to receive my formal diagnosis, no one seems to talk about the loneliness that can come afterwards. Although I'm one of the lucky ones receiving my diagnosis in my 20s, I know there are hundreds of others that didn't discover their autism until they're in their 50s or 60s. However, I do grieve for what a difference an earlier autism diagnosis would have made to myself. I really struggled in the school environment. This was more problematic when I was in secondary school. I now question if I would have had a better self-understanding at the time in my life, whether my mental health issues would have got so out of hand during that time, if I would have been able to access quieter spaces or more support. I often also think about if during my teenage years I would have been able to have healthier and safer friendships and relationships. I often find myself questioning whether my undiagnosed autism and gullible understanding of what others say to me was a factor to some of my experiences as a teenager. Back in 2022, a study found that nearly 9 in 10 autistic women have been victims of sexual violence. I'm sadly part of that. But how is this happening to so many autistic women and girls? I feel that a late diagnosis is a massive factor. Navigating consent can be tricky at the best of times, when so much of our sexual communication relies on understanding body language and non-verbal cues. How do we, individuals with autism who already struggle with reading social cues, deal with this confusing space? I feel I'm in a much healthier space in terms of navigating consent and making sure boundaries are set in place, despite my communication difficulties. But I know this is not the case for many autistic women still. I hope in the future a more inclusive sex education syllabus will be available, accessible to all within the education system. A late diagnosis and starting the journey of unmasking and realising who I am as an unmasked version of myself, without doubt, has been tough. But without my previous life experiences and facing my misdiagnosis and late diagnosis, I wouldn't have the passion I do now for advocating for those of us who fall into the late discovered club. Thank you for listening to me share my story and talking about navigating a late diagnosis of autism. I hope I haven't bored anyone too much. And that's from me. So thank you for listening. I did sort of allow time. I don't know if anyone had any questions or anything like that, or points they wanted to raise. No. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. I think it's becoming more of a common problem. I think so. I'm Devon-based, but locally to me, I have heard stories of people that have experienced trauma as well as waiting for an autism assessment, being denied their autism assessment, and it's sadly I think it's part of lack of education. And unfortunately, I think it is something that definitely needs to change. Definitely. Yeah, like reasonable adjustments so she can access those services should be available. Yeah, most definitely. No, thank you.